All right, so listen, I'm gonna go out on a limb and tell you guys something. I know it's potentially controversial. It's one of those things like I've thought a lot about it, and I just think I'm ready to talk about something that like it's just really controversial and it's really a thing. But I don't think that war is a good thing. I know, I know, you're shocked by this. That's one of those positions that like celebrities would come up with. Like they have like four publicists that help them write a tweet or whatever they're calling it these days. And like it just comes out like war is bad. Good job, well done. You've said something every human person forever has known. And here's something equally obvious: war is bad, not just because like soldiers die, but other people too. Again, hard hitting analysis. War would be bad enough, just as an aside. Like even if just the combatants of war were the only victims here, obviously war would be really bad. We as Christians understand the sanctity of life and how everyone is important, and so soldiers, like that's obviously terrible. War is always bad, okay? But obviously that's not what happens, and I think sometimes we discover the same truths over and over, and these things are universal truths. And I could probably talk about a lot of different wars with something, but thousands of years ago, we discover in the life of like the first patriarch of our faith the same principles we find today in our world, right? With war, where it's not just that the combatants of war dying and suffering is bad, but it's the people that get caught in the crossfire, right? Because that's how war happens. It's you'll kill a bunch of people. It's hard to make sure you're killing the right ones. So this is what happened. Abraham is called out of his family, and he goes into his place called Canaan, and he takes his nephew, and his nephew is named Lot, and he takes a whole mess of other people too, like his father's house, his family. He has tons of money. He's got all these servants. He's got probably cousins. Nephew. We're not exactly told exactly what the relations are with everybody, but it's his household is the way that the Bible talks about it. So Abraham has this huge household. He's all these huge people, and Lot, his nephew separates and goes and lives on his own. Not like they're still friends. It's just one lives on his own. And they kind of run into this geopolitical problem in their world that they knew nothing about. See, Canaan at the time was split up into these 9 kingdoms with these 9 kings. And one day, this tyrant from another land shows up with this massive army and declares war on everybody, as tyrants with massive armies from other lands often do. And this massive war happens, and the tyrant wins and subjugates all of the other kingdoms, right? Like, so these other kings, they're still kings, but they all have to answer to this other guy. And for 12 years, that's what happens. For 12 years, this tyrant, whose name I cannot pronounce, which is why I will continue to call him just the tyrant. This tyrant rules everybody like with an iron fist, as tyrants are wont to do. After 12 years, though, the kings decided we want to do something about this. And actually, when I say the kings, I mean there was like 4 of them that said let's band together. Right. The problem was he fought us individually before, but if we band together, maybe we can win. And so these 4 kingdoms kind of pool their resources together, and they go to war against the tyrant. The problem is the tyrant says, okay, cool, I don't even want to fight these people. I'll just let these other people fight. It becomes 4 armies versus 5 armies. This like weird civil war between people who don't want to fight each other. They all want to fight this guy, right? And of course, the tyrant ends up winning, as tyrants often do. And so the tyrant wins and does what ancient people do in the times of war. They go get the spoils of war. Lands, women, slaves, people, possessions, gold, whatever. And as the tyrant goes along and he's collecting the spoils of war from all of these various people, he doesn't really know who were the combatants and who weren't. And frankly, he doesn't care. You don't get to be a tyrant by caring about people. So he doesn't care at all. So he just starts collecting everybody and just enslaving everybody and imprisoning everybody. And this Lot, this poor guy who, he doesn't even understand, he can't pronounce the guy's names, right? Like, he has no idea what's going on. His name is Lot. These people haven't named that long. No idea what's going on. He doesn't know who's good. He doesn't know who's bad. He doesn't know who the tyrant is. He just moved here and just wants to be left alone, but that's not what happens. He gets taken, and his people get taken, and his land gets taken. And a couple of servants end up escaping and going and telling Abraham. And telling Abraham, this is what happened. And you're probably thinking, because of the picture we have in our mind due to, like, I don't know, Renaissance art or something, you have a picture in your mind of what Abraham is. Like, if every time you see Abraham in like a painting or anything, he's like the old guy with the long, like big long beard. Like, he's like a skinny Santa Claus. He's like Gandalf without the magic powers and the hat. You know, like old white dude with the beard. Like that's what we think of Abraham. Like he's super old, you know, kind of like kindly grandpa kind of looking figure, right? I need us to understand that the rest of the story, like, is telling us that that's not true. That's not who or what Abraham was. Abraham finds out that his nephew Lot has been taken, and Abraham takes that personally. And he goes to his household and he says, I'm looking for volunteers. We're going to go slaughter an army. And I don't know how many of y'all we need. You know, I don't know how many, but how many of you guys want to go slaughter an army? Because they took your buddy Lot. Like, he's your cousin or your, you know, I don't know, friend, or it's all whole, like, mixed up household. But it's your family. They took your family, right? And 318 soldiers come out of the household of Abraham. And Abraham commands them. And Abraham, with his 318, an oddly specific number, 318 soldiers, slaughter the troops of the tyrant. Just destroy them. And the Bible doesn't even tell us how. It's just, yeah, Abraham's that tough. Abraham's that strong. Abraham is that kind of a man. He's that kind of a warrior. He just dismantles these guys, takes Lot and his people back, takes all their stuff, and says to anyone who'll listen, y'all better not do that again. You see what happens? We will be left alone. And Abraham goes back, and Lot goes back, and that's the end of the story. And what I'm trying to tell you is this is what we're getting at. Abraham is not this, like, doddering old man. Like, he's not like this guy, you know, walking around with, you know, like you know, like, kind of old. I don't want to insult anybody, but like, you get like old, and you got that like hump. I always think of Abraham like with the hump, because like he's super old, it sounds like, but that's not it. He is a character from a Ridley Scott movie. Okay? Like, he is a soldier. He is a testosterone-fueled, gym membership-owning. Actually, didn't even have it. He built his own home gym. So that way he can get them gains at 4 a.m. after he eats his egg whites. And I don't know anything about this world, guys. I'm literally just making it up as I go. And I don't think I'm getting it right. I'm so sorry, those of you who are actually fit and in shape. I mean, if I were not preaching a sermon, I would just repeatedly refer to him by a word that starts with a B and ends with an S. Like, that is who Abraham was. Abraham was a commanding, conquering warlord. And I'm pretty sure he had, like, the emotional capacity of one, too. Because shortly after this, his wife comes up with, like, the worst possible idea. And at any point, he could have been the adult in the room and stopped it. If he had any ability to, like, think through anything, he'd have been like, I bet that's a bad idea. I bet my wife is just crying out for help. I bet I should just, like, give her a hug or something. But instead, the meathead is like, yeah, okay, let's do it. Because he's a conquering warlord. He's a meathead. Here's the problem. God had told Abraham, you're going to be the father of this whole nation. The problem was he wasn't the father of, like, anybody. He had no children. And that's not good, because you can't be the father of a nation if you're not the father of an individual. And the reason was his wife Sarah was barren. And she is the problem. I'm not trying to be mean, but it's her. Like, she's like, it's not him, it's her. And so God says, hey, look, this is the problem. Or God didn't say there's a problem. God says, I'm going to give you a child. I'm going to make you the father of a great nation. But he doesn't, like, tell him when. He doesn't need to tell him how, like Abraham knows the birds and the bees. But he doesn't know. It's never worked, right? Like, so he doesn't know when, and it continues to not work. So he just doesn't know what to do. And I think when we hear the story, we think about that this bothers Sarah. But we have to understand this bothered Abraham equally. Just like Sarah comes up with her own plan, Abraham comes up with his. He's got this servant named Eleazar, and he tells God, he's like, look, I get what we're saying. We're going to use the father thing in a metaphorical way. Eleazar is my servant. He's like a son to me, so we can just run the covenant through him. We'll just run the promises through him, and it'll be, Abraham and Eleazar, and then he can have children, and that'll be what we do. Like Abraham had come up with this big, long scheme of everything. That's what he had done too. And just as Sarah did, his was less catastrophic to everyone around her all the time. While he was coming up with his plan with Eleazar, Sarah was coming up with a different plan. And she said, look, if I can't have a child, I'll find somebody who can have a child. Abraham can have a child with this woman, and then we'll raise the child, and then I'll be the mother to this child, and then that will be how we do this, which involves Abraham having a child with somebody else. And if you guys know the birds and the bees, you know why that's not ideal for anyone. And if you don't know the birds and the bees, you're too old for that. By now, you should have figured it out. Don't Google it. Find a trusted adult to sit you down and talk to you about that. So Sarah finds somebody who is very fertile. I don't know how she figured it out, but she's like, she looks like she could make a baby, no problem. And so she finds this servant. Her name is Hagar. And she goes to Abraham and she says, look, just sleep with Hagar. She'll give you a child. She'll give us a child. And then this is what we'll do. And Abraham should have been like, oh, man, no, that's awful. Like, you clearly have some trauma and you need counseling and love and chocolate and like a weekend away with your girlfriends. Like, you desperately need something besides your plan. But remember, Abraham is not the kindly old grandpa. That's not who he is. Abraham is a testosterone-fueled warlord. Okay? He is a guy who, with 300 dudes, conquers an army. He's just like, oh, okay. Because that's Abraham. That's just who he is. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He is a couple of chicken nuggets away from a six-pack. And so he's like, okay, I'll do it. No problem. And they do. And she does. And so now Hagar is pregnant. And when you do something dumb and you should have thought about it right before the moment when you realize you shouldn't have done it? About the time she's pregnant, everybody realizes we might not have thought this through, actually. Because, see, it starts with Hagar. She's pregnant with a man's baby who's not her husband in a patriarchal world where that gives her absolutely no rights whatsoever. None. Zero. She's a servant. She's a slave. They could slit her throat and put her in the ditch and nobody would care. She's property. I know that sounds bad. That's the world she lives in. She's sitting here saying, I don't know what to do. I don't like this at all. I have no security at all. They're just going to take my baby and be done with me. I don't want that. I understand I agreed to this, but also, did I? Because, servants can't really consent. You get it? And so she kind of starts acting out and treating Sarah badly. Because of course she does. Like, you would too. And so Sarah looks at that and is like, I can't believe she's treating me badly. I mean, she could believe it, but she didn't like it. Because Sarah's already insecure, right? She's the barren one. She's the one with the problem. She's the one who can't do this. She's the one that, in her mind, she can't provide for her husband, so she found somebody who could. That's not a good feeling. She didn't like that at all. And so now that woman that's supposed to be helping her is treating her badly. And she knows why. Well, now that you're pregnant, now you'll talk back to me. Now that you're pregnant, now you'll treat me like that. Now that it's terrible. And so Sarah goes to Abraham, and marriage is fun because Sarah goes to Abraham and is like, this is your fault, man. You got this girl pregnant, and now she's treating me terribly. And Abraham, who is all testosterone and those veins in the muscles, right? He's like, I do not have the emotional capacity to deal with this at all. He's like, all right, Sarah, here you go. Okay, I'll tell you what. She's your servant. You deal with it. And I just feel like Abraham thought that he was very smart when he said that. Like, yeah, it's a good day's work. Solved a problem, made the wife happy. Everything's good. Poor Abraham has no idea how stupid he is, because that's the curse of being stupid. Right? Like, everybody else knows you're dumb, but you're too dumb to know you're dumb. Abraham just thinks, well, I've succeeded. Congratulations, Abraham. And so Sarah's like, well, he said I can do whatever. And she does whatever. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly what she did. But what we're told is that she mistreated Hagar to the point that Hagar, in a patriarchal world, as a pregnant slave with no protection whatsoever, ran away. Like, can you imagine how bad life was with Sarah? To run away whilst pregnant 4,000 years ago? Like, I'm not trying to say that Sarah's like the worst person ever. She's just acting out of her pain and trauma, and we should have sympathy for her. But come on, Sarah. What did she do? The answer is bad stuff. So, she takes off. And look, there's more to the story. You guys probably remember it from Sunday school, because these are the type of stories you learn in Sunday school before you understand anything. But I actually love this story, right? I love this story because everybody is terrible and dumb and ridiculous. And it's the sort of plan that, like, I think when I was younger and I read this story in the Bible, I was like, I can't believe people would be like that. And then I got older and I met people and I was like, oh, I get it. Like, I've met enough people to know that, like, this is their these are problem-solving strategies. Like, these are the ideas we come up with. This is the best we can do. Like, you think, like, is that the best you can do? Yes, this is the best we can do. And yet, the story is one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible, because despite all of the awfulness, God just shows up again and again in every part of it, every nook and cranny of the story, and fills it with his grace and his mercy. Starts with Hagar. Hagar is safe. God protects her. God loves her. She ends up devoted and devout in her faith with God. She ends up calling the God who sees me. Man, what a beautiful name. That God would look at us, see us for who we are, and love us just like that. That's how Hagar understood God. She gave birth to a kid named Ishmael. And look, I understand there's a long history with Ishmael and Isaac down the road. But Ishmael, the story of just Ishmael the person, is that God looked at Ishmael and said, none of this is your fault, man. None of it. You didn't ask for any of this. And he showers Ishmael with love and blessings. He makes Ishmael into the father of his own nation. No, he's not the child born of the promise to Abraham and Sarah. He could never be that. Like, this was all a weird deviation that was doomed to fail from the start. But God took care of him. God showed him love. And Ishmael lived an incredibly beautiful, blessed life knowing God because of God's mercy. And then eventually, Sarah gets pregnant. And, then there's Isaac. And now we have the line that ends up with, ends up with Jesus. And it's great. And it's amazing because God didn't look at Sarah and say, you idiot. Or you sinner, I'm done. He doesn't look at Abraham and says, I can't believe I picked a meathead. I'm picking somebody with a few more brains. Like, no, God says, I love you guys. I care for you guys. I'm here for you guys. I'm always here for you. The plan is not changed. Nothing about the plan is in any way different. It's become a little more complicated because y'all are a little dumb. But the plan is going to go, and it's going to go the way it's going to go. And in every part of this, as much as this is all messed up, God's love and mercy and grace is at the center of all of it. And I love that. Now, this is, again, one of those classic stories. Like, if you were to, I don't know, like, have like a top 10 Bible stories that you're supposed to know, this is one of them. I don't know. I don't know how it got there, but it is. And there's a lot we could learn from it, but I think it's really interesting to see how the Apostle Paul deals with this and uses this story when he's trying to kind of have his own problem-solving stuff with the church, right? We've been talking for this is week 5 now. We've been talking for a little more than a month now about the churches of Galatia. And as we talked about, this is a region of the first century world where things were really, really unique. Things were different. And there's all this social pressure. We've talked about the social pressure, and we've talked about the pressure in the church. But within the church, with the churches of Galatia, you've really kind of 3 different groups of people we've talked about. There's the one group of people where you have Jewish Christians who believe that in order to be Christian, you need to be Jewish. We've talked about how there's a good amount of reason why they thought that. There's a lot that made sense to them. Jesus is a Jew. Jesus never told them not to. Things like that. And it was just always like an unbroken line. And so they saw themselves as interacting with God and knowing God and believing in God through circumcision, the temple, eating kosher, following the law, those kinds of things. By being Jewish, by being religious, that is how they related to Christ. And they believed that everyone else should do the same thing. That was one group of people. Second group of people were kind of they were the new people. They just showed up to the church. They were very late. They were Gentiles, non-Jewish people who had become Christians, but didn't really have a lot of interest in being Jewish because they wanted to follow Jesus. They believed in Jesus. They loved the Lord with all their heart, soul, and mind, but they do not know where that's from in the Old Testament. And so they wanted to be these people, but they had no interest in eating kosher because they liked the food they liked, and they had no interest in being circumcised because, and they had no interest in following, the law because there's like 600 rules in there. They're supposed to learn that, and they're like 37. Like, come on. So all they wanted to do was follow Jesus, and they were under the impression they could. And so you got those 2 groups of people. And then I think probably, and I don't have like a Bible verse or like a church history thing here, but I think the biggest group of people, just knowing the world that we live in now, the biggest group of people were the shrug emoji people who were just like, I don't know. But I do know we should get along, guys. Could we just get along? And those people, most people, by the way, are shrug emoji people. They're not usually that helpful to things because it's just being like, we should get along. Yeah, but we don't. Okay, now what? It's hard to know. And so Paul is talking to all of these people. And we've talked about this for, a month now. But one of the most interesting things is that if you look at the book of Galatians, he's writing to these churches in Galatia. One of the things that's interesting is that he uses the story of Sarah and Hagar, and specifically the story of the birth of Ishmael and Isaac. And he uses that as an allegory, as a metaphor, as an illustration of the whole conversation. And I think he used this story in part because the people he really wanted to hear the message were Jewish. And so he told a Jewish story from their history, something they could relate to. But regardless, he uses this and he explains that the whole debate can be boiled down to the births of 2 children. He said, on the one hand, there's the birth of Ishmael. And he said the birth of Ishmael, the problem with the birth of Ishmael, there's a few problems, but the biggest problem with the birth of Ishmael is that was Sarah and Abraham's attempt to do what God wanted, but it was their attempt to do what God wanted their way. Meaning, Sarah and Abraham were not faithless people. It's not that they didn't want to do the right thing. They'd left their home and they had gone to this whole new place. They had uprooted everything. They had followed God, this God, by the way, that nobody else knows, that to everybody else doesn't even exist. They had done the unthinkable. They had become monotheists in a world where monotheism was not a thing. They had done so many things. All they wanted to do was serve and honor God. But see, serving and honoring God to a point with the child meant being patient and having hope and having faith and letting God work in God's timing. And I couldn't do that. And I get it, I've been a little mean to Sarah in this sermon. I meant to be more mean to Abraham. Sarah deserves some pushback. She does. But can you imagine the creator of all things, the one who created reality, comes to you and says, "Hey, your husband's gonna be the father of, this whole nation," and you're like, "Yeah, but I can't have kids." Like, it's one thing to be disappointing to like your parents. It's another thing to be disappointing to yourself. Like that's like escalating. Sarah had to feel like a disappointment to the one who made her. She didn't want Hagar as the third person in this weird polycule. That's not what she wanted. She just wanted to serve God and didn't think she could as she was. And so she creates this plan. And what Paul says is that the birth of Ishmael is therefore a child born of human effort to do God's work. And that's bad. It's not great. And Paul, there's a nice, tidy illustration, says this is the Jewish Christians. This is you guys. You want to do God's work. I get that you want to do God's work. I get that you want to live the gospel. I get that you want to follow Jesus. But you are trying to follow Jesus with circumcision and the law and the temple and kosher eating. And you are doing everything you can to work your way to God, to do God's things your way. And then he said, on the other hand, there's Isaac. And the thing about Isaac is, like, I know the Bible has a lot of miracle babies. It's sort of the Bible's thing. But Isaac is an incredible miracle. I don't want to be crass, but like, if Sarah's going to call on Hagar to do this, there's no hope. This is not even like Dumb and Dumber, so you're saying there's a chance. Like, it's not it. Like, there's no chance. In her mind, there is no chance. And frankly, biologically, there's no chance that she can give birth to this child. None. And then she does. Because it's funny, because I just said God created a reality. I'm pretty sure a baby is fine. Like, if God creates the whole of everything that's ever existed, like, I know that every baby's a miracle, and I know that, but think about how, like, nothing that is to God when he created, like, existence and the concept of life being a thing. Of course it's a miracle. And it happened despite the sin of Sarah and Abraham, despite the fact that they had rebelled against him, despite the fact that they didn't believe it could happen. You want to talk about the way that God works? They don't have faith. They don't have belief. They don't have obedience. They've done nothing good at all. And God's like, here, have it anyway. Like, this is why this story is so amazing, right? Like, the grace and the mercy here is just, it's mind-boggling. And Paul says that's the gospel. We are saved by Christ, his death, his resurrection, his blood, his work. We're not saved by things we do. We're saved by the work of Christ. And he tells the churches of Galatia, you have two choices as you approach your faith and your religion. You can be people of the birth of Ishmael, human effort to do God's things, or you can be people who understand God's ways and God's purposes with Isaac. And of course, Paul wants the readers of the book of Galatians to understand this. And helpfully, by the way, he just sort of summarized this in Galatians chapter 4. He says, the son of the slave wife was born in a human attempt to bring about the fulfillment of God's promise, but the son of the freeborn wife was born as God's own fulfillment of his promise. The Paul writing this in the book says, I want you to think about that, and I want you to make your choice. And so we just read it. Good, fantastic. The question has to be asked, what does our faith look like? And here's the problem with questions like that. I remember being younger and people would be like, well, which choice do you want? And I remember being like, well, you didn't really give me a choice. Like, there's a right answer, and then you told me the right answer, you told me the wrong answer. If I choose the wrong answer, I'm going to look like an idiot. I'm going to look like Abraham, not knowing what to say to Sarah. Like, I don't want that. You know the right answer. But here's the funny thing about the Christianity and the funny thing about like Judaism. Pretty similar. And I know we are all about grace and mercy. We're all about God's love. I get that. But like, so the Jews had circumcision, and we don't have circumcision as a religious rite, but we do have baptism, which is compared to circumcision in the New Testament. Okay? We don't like eat kosher, but we do have, the communion we eat every week. That's a food stuff we're supposed to do. We may not have the temple, but we have church. Supposed to go to church every week or whenever you feel like it or whatever. Right? Like, we don't really have the law. We're very proud of we don't have the law. But then, like, we have the entire New Testament, which feels somewhat larger than the law, if you think about it. And see, here's the problem. Nobody would ever say it. I don't expect that you would. Nobody would ever say, this is what my faith looks like. But for so many people, deep down inside, in their brains and their hearts and their souls, we're kind of the Jewish Christians trying to work our way to God. Like, we got baptized because, like, we had to. We take communion because, like, you have to. You get up on Sunday morning because, like, you have to. At least a couple times a year. Like, you try not to be a terrible person and because, like, you have to. And then we make the jokes of like, well, I guess that joke is why I'm going to hell. All right, this is what I did. This is why God can't forgive me. Like, we have these ideas, right? And we kind of build the same things. And so the question really comes down to this. How could we know if we are relying on the grace and the mercy and the love of Christ? And how could we know if we're like the Jewish Christians and trying to earn our way to God? Hopefully, Paul gives us a pretty fantastic answer in the next chapter of the book of Galatians. He talks about how this whole thing, he's like using metaphors as he goes. And he talks about, after he talks about this, he talks about like living for either the flesh, being like human effort, or living for the spirit, being, trusting God. And this is what we read about what it means to live in the spirit. It's in Galatians chapter 5. This is what we read. Paul says, since we are living by the Spirit, let us follow the Spirit's leading in every part of our lives. Let us not become conceited or provoke one another or be jealous of one another. Okay, so to make sure we're all on the same track here, we don't want to be like Sarah and Abraham coming up with their own plan to do God's work, right? And so we want to make the right choice, but it's hard to make that choice because our natural inclination is to try to do it all ourselves. Right? Our natural inclination is to interpret all of our religion as stuff we are doing for God, right? And so the question is, how do we live by the Spirit and not the flesh? Paul says there's three things. Let us not become conceited, provoke one another, or be jealous of one another. Let me tell you, I can summarize that in one thing. Let's not be selfish. You see, all of those things are things that come out of selfishness and self-centeredness. We are conceited. We puff ourselves up. We believe we are more than we are because we are all about ourselves. We provoke one another because it's a competition. We want to win the game. We provoke somebody because we want to have this like battle of importance and we want to win the battle of importance. And of course, jealousy, right? Like we want the stuff other people have. All of that is about ourselves. But see, selfish living that is spiritual living makes no sense because if the gospel goes like this, that God is about mercy and grace, God is the God of the birth of Isaac. They were sinful, they were wrong, they'd done everything incorrectly, and God blessed them anyway. If that's who God is, then it is one way, it is unilateral from God to us, and therefore everything we do is simply a response to what God does, not the other way around. In other words, Christianity is not us trying to manipulate God. I don't get baptized because I want God, to save me because I got wet in a tub of water. I get baptized because I understand that God has loved me, God has blessed me, God has saved me through the cross, and in response to that, I embrace that salvation at the cross by mimicking and mirroring that moment in time. Just as Christ is dead, buried, and raised, we are dead, buried, and raised. We embrace what has been done on our behalf. communion. Communion is not for God. We don't take communion because it makes God happy. We take communion so we can be reminded of who God is, who we are, who God is not, and who we are not. We don't come to church because God's going to be mad at us if we don't. Why would God care which building we spend an hour, between 10:30 and 11:30 on Sunday? Like, why would God care which building we were in? God made up the concept of DNA and molecules. I don't think he cares which building you sit in. But church is a gift to us. It's an opportunity for us to gather, to learn, to grow, to be inspired, to go out. What am I missing? The New Testament. You do realize, you get to a certain age, and this I don't really need to preach, because if you live, against what Jesus taught for long enough, you'll learn why Jesus taught it. Jesus is wildly practical. Jesus is not just coming up with new stuff to, give you new stuff to do. Jesus is just telling you guys, this is what works. This is what a good life looks like. You want to be absolutely miserable? Don't do any of this stuff. You want to have, a horrible, meaningless existence? Ignore what I'm saying. Everything we do religiously is a gift from God. And the reason we do that is because we, in faith, are saying, God, I believe that what you have given me is enough. And when we believe that what God has given us is enough, being selfish doesn't make any sense. I don't need to puff myself up because what God has given me is enough. I don't need to compete with anybody because what God has given me is enough. I don't have to worry about what somebody else has because what God has given me is enough. Abraham and Sarah, God loved them. They couldn't quite get it. And so Paul holds them up as an example and says, you have a choice. You can choose God's things your way or God's things God's way. And this is the series, Control What You Control. This is the heart of it, right? When we try to control the world around us, boy, is that just a recipe for beating our heads into the wall over and over. But when we can let go and say, okay, this is going to be what this is going to be. And God is with me no matter what. And God is working no matter what. And I trust, maybe not that everything perfectly falls into place, but I do trust that God is God regardless. And when we can get to that place, we can recognize we have everything we need. We never need to be selfish. And we can be people who choose a faith that looks like the birth of Isaac. We got one more week of this. One more week. We're almost to the end. We're in our fifth and nearly final week of our series called Control What You Can Control. And as we talk about it, Abraham, Isaac, and everything else in between, we learn this lesson. Our fifth lesson from controlling what you control is this. We never need to earn God's love. And since we always have it, we can trust him enough to live selflessly. We never need to earn God's love, and since we always have it, we can trust him enough to live selflessly. We offer an invitation each and every week. Basically, we just talked about baptism a little bit. If you want to become a Christian, if you want to be baptized, we can talk. Let's talk. That's great. If you want to join the church, we can talk. Let's talk. That's great. Regardless. Nothing in this world is about us. Nothing in this world is something that we need to grab and hold on to. Instead, we trust in the Lord. We're faithful. And we say, you know what? It doesn't have to be about me because in Christ I have all I need. As we stand,